I'm super hyped today to introduce CJ Drake to come and do his second devotional. As we were talking earlier, I've been trying to get up with him for a couple weeks, and me and him's been trying to figure out a good date to come, and he's finally able to come and do one, and I'm just super excited about it. So without further ado, I'll introduce CJ Drake.
Once again, thank you, Aaron, for the introduction. Well, it is a joy to be doing this Red Couch devotional again. It's always encouraging to be asked to do something once, but it's even more encouraging to be asked to do something again, to know that I didn't mess things up or speak in heresy the first time. So it's always encouraging to bring you God's words. Thank you, Aaron, for the opportunity. That's the foundation that I build off. That's my presupposition, that it's God's word, not any of my own. That it's not my own opinions, it's not my own thoughts, but it comes from God's word. God's word that He has revealed to us. His word that He loved us so much that He gave us and allowed us the opportunity to come and be able to study it. So without further ado, the passage that I'm going to be reading from today is going to be found in Matthew chapter 13. Starting in verse 1, God's word says, "That same day Jesus went out of the house and sat beside the sea, and great crowds gathered about him. So he got into a boat and sat down, and the whole crowd stood on the beach, and he told them many things in parables, saying, A sower went out to sow, and as he sowed, some seeds fell on the path, and the birds came and devoured them. Other seeds fell on rocky ground, where they did not have much soil, and immediately sprang up, since they had no depth in soil. But when the sun rose, they were scorched. Since they had no root, they withered away. Other seeds fell on thorns, and then the thorns grew up and choked them. Other seeds fell on good soil and produced grain, some 100-fold, some 60, and some 30. He who has ears, let him hear." Then moving on to verse 18 of Matthew chapter 13, Jesus goes on to explain what the parable means. A parable is just an illustrative story that Jesus taught that explained what He was about to teach. So in verse 18 it picks up, "Hear the parable of the sower. When anyone hears the word of the kingdom and does not understand it, the evil one comes and snatches it away, what has been sown in his heart. This is what was sown along the path. As for what was sown on the rocky ground, this is the one who hears the word and immediately receives it with joy. Yet he has no root in himself, but endures for a while. And when tribulation or persecution arises on account of the word, immediately he falls away. As for what was sown among the thorns, this is the one who hears the words, but the cares of the world, and the deceitfulness of riches choke the word, and it proves unfruitful. As for what was sown on good soil, this is the one who hears the word and understands it. He indeed bears fruit and yields, in one case 100-fold, in another 60, and in another 30. For those of you who may not know, I'm the youth director at Parkview Baptist. And being in ministry is one of the greatest joys that I have and that I could ever do. To spend my life invested in spreading the gospel and sharing the gospel and loving people, it's a wonderful joy. But just as because it's my joy to serve Christ in this area, that doesn't mean that it's easy. Now, whether you're in ministry or not, sharing the gospel and trusting God with the results can be difficult. It's hard. It can be discouraging sometimes. It is for me. For me, it's discouraging when I constantly spread the gospel and sow the gospel seeds with some people and see zero results. It's discouraging sometimes. There's two questions that come to my mind when looking at this passage. First question that comes to my mind is, why do we sow? Why do we share the gospel? The answer to this is found in Romans chapter 10. How then will they call on Him whom they've not believed? How are they to believe in Him whom they have never heard? And how are they to hear without someone preaching? Why do we share the gospel? Because how can someone be saved unless they hear the gospel? Unless someone tells them, unless we tell them. As followers of Christ, we have a calling to do. We're called to sow or scatter the seeds wherever we go, to all people, Whether those people look like us, whether those people talk like us, act like us, we are to share the gospel. Whether we see the results or not, we're to share the gospel. If you've been saved, just think for a moment back to when you were saved. How did you find out about Christ? Someone shared it with you. Maybe they shared it with you many times. Much in the same, we're to continually share the gospel and share the good news of Christ to all those who desperately need Christ. And this leads to the second question: what is the result? And this is why I included verses 18 through 23 in this devotional. This is the hardest part of being in ministry. But it's also the most encouraging. And I know that sounds like an oxymoron, but let me explain with the following story. So the other day I was out shoveling snow. After the big snowstorm, went outside to shovel the snow. I knew that if I didn't shovel the snow, then the snow would partially melt and add on to the ice that was already there. After I shoveled the snow, there was still a thin layer of ice underneath it. There was nothing I could do about it. That's when I went over to the shed and got a bag of salt out and started throwing the salt on the ground. It was in this moment that God reminded me of this exact parable, and this great parable in His Word. Just as there was nothing that I could do to physically melt the ice on my driveway, my job was to put the salt down and trust that it would melt. Much in the same, when I'm discouraged because I'm sharing the gospel and there's no salvation, I have to trust God with the results. I have to trust God in those moments. It's encouraging to know that the weight and the results of salvation doesn't lie in our hands. That we don't have to have the perfect formula. We don't have to have the right magic words for the lost to get saved. No, it's encouraging to know that we are called to spread the gospel seeds. Spread and sow the seeds. But it's God that gives the results. That's the encouraging thing. And that's where I want to encourage you now. Maybe you're watching this and you've felt discouraged because you're not seeing the fruit of salvation in someone. You've been sharing the gospel and still seeing no results. But regardless of what the result is, regardless of what soil it is or whether their heart is receptive to that or not, sow the seeds. Continue to plant those seeds and let God get the result. Keep bringing the good news of Christ to others. I want to end this segment with one of my favorite things that Paul says in 1 Corinthians 3, 6 through 7. He finishes addressing some disunity and some angst and division going on within the church there. He finishes off by this phrase here. In verse 6, it says, I planted, Apollos watered, but God gave the growth. So neither he who plants nor he who waters is anything, but only God who gives the growth. No matter what the end result is, I want to encourage you by saying keep spreading those seeds. Whether it's received or whether it's rejected, sow those seeds.